Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. So, can Jeremy Corbyn become Prime Minister? Now, no, that isn't quite the same question as can Corbyn win a general election. The answer to that, in my view, is no, as was demonstrated ably during the last disastrous Conservative campaign that still saw them forming a government, albeit with a Faustian pact with the DUP. But the Conservatives are in such a shambles and so divided that people may just use the old protest vote to decide, well, better the devil you don't know. Not that I'm calling Corbyn a devil, I'm a Labour member, and although he's very far from my first choice as Prime Minister, he's much closer to it than any Conservative MP. But it seemed to be opposite day today in the papers. So take the Sunday Telegraph, a right-wing newspaper, and the Observer, a left-wing one. Now, the right-wing Sunday Telegraph are bigging up Jeremy Corbyn's chances of getting into number 10. In fact, they're making it seem almost inevitable. The left-leaning Observer, on the other hand, are cautioning that Corbyn's actions are risking a whole generation of voters and it actually all could go tits up. So where do the opinion polls stand on this? Now, I keep saying that opinion polls are showing Labour with a massive lead. It's not quite true. The people are not lying, but just don't quite understand polling or statistics. Now, there are two major things to consider when looking at opinion polls in this regard. One, the proportion of the public who would vote a particular way has little to do with electoral success. To give a US example, polls predicted that Hillary Clinton would win more votes than Donald Trump. And so she did. But she didn't become president because of the electoral college system that means the votes of some US citizens count for more than others. Now, the same thing happens in the UK with the first past the post constituency system. During the last general election, the Conservatives won more of the popular vote than Labour. However, its share of the popular vote was a little under 6% more than Labour's. But they won 21% more seats than Labour. So their representation in Parliament is out of proportion to their share of the vote. So polls won't let you know how likely a party is to win a general election, only give you an indication of how the popular vote may go. The second thing is that polls are biased. I take part in polls myself, I sign up to several, and at the end of the survey there is a comment box to discuss any issues of bias that you found. I filled it in quite a few times. It's quite easy to phrase questions in such a way as to get an unrepresentative answer, especially if you don't offer up all the responses that someone might reasonably give. You're therefore not getting an answer from a person, you're just getting the answer that they prefer out of the ones you've offered them. Now, as an experiment with my students, what I sometimes do when teaching statistics is to write a response down, put it in a card in an envelope, give it to that student, and then give them a quick survey. Then at the end of the survey, I get them to read the card and to tell me what their answer to the final question was. It's almost always correct. Because the solution to this is not to look at any one opinion poll. That's the problem. What you need to do is to try and consider all of them to see if all those biases will at least smooth out. So if you look at the polls, some of them show a Labour lead of up to 9%. And surprise, surprise, this is the figure that is quoted by some Labour supporters. But that's at the upper end. It also goes down as far as predicting a 4% lead for the Conservatives. The average is something like about a 3% lead for Labour at the moment. Now, when you actually consider this huge spread as well, and they're all opinion polls, it just should tell you that they're not going to be hugely accurate if you just look at one opinion poll. That's why you have to look at the spread. And when I say about 3% lead for Labour, that is if you give them all equal weighting. But of course, they all asked the question in different ways and all had a different range of options as answers. So it is tricky. For example, some of those polls allowed people to say that they would vote for the Brexit Party or UKIP. Some of them didn't. So that could affect the result. So going back to those newspapers, both of them are clearly just trying to warn the party that they want to be in government rather than actually reporting on the news. The Sunday Telegraph can't possibly say that the Conservatives would lose 60 seats if there were a general election tomorrow. No poll can give you that indication, as I already discussed, because all the polls do is give you an indicator of where the popular vote would go. But if you're a party, for example, that wins a lot of seats by a small margin, and then another party wins fewer seats but by a much larger margin, then you can both actually have the same share of the vote, but one party gets more seats. So as for the Observer, there is a real risk of Corbyn losing younger voters if he keeps Labour as a Brexit party. And that's all they're reporting there, really. But how a person intends to vote now is not necessarily how they will vote when a general election is triggered. The reason for this is that when a general election is called, campaigning begins. If campaigning had no effect on people's voting behaviour, then a silly amount of money wouldn't be spent on it. But it is effective, and so you might expect to see voting behaviour change from current intentions. I'd also like to think that enough people would vote Labour to oust the Tories, whether because of a real desire to bring social justice to the country, because the current government is just so incompetent, even if you agree with their policies, or just because familiarity breeds contempt, and after about 10 years you want a change of government. All works for me, whatever. So we have no idea of how a general election really will pan out until it's almost upon us. And when it's almost upon us, is it really worth speculating, because we can just wait for the result at that point? Of course, the irony is that if the Conservatives believe that they would lose a general election, then there's no way it would be triggered. The only way to have a general election this year that returns Labour into government is if Conservative MPs massively misjudge the situation. And vote, because they'd have to vote against their own party in the belief that the Conservatives would do better than Labour in a general election. In theory, the DUP could vote against the government to trigger a general election as well, but they hate Corbyn even more than the Tories do. So what can be said from the polls? We can certainly see increasing support for Labour as time goes on. This has happened before, though, and gone badly wrong. Anyone remember 1992? And another thing to bear in mind, really important, is the polls do not say why people are now preferring Labour to the Conservatives. Is it dissatisfaction with the Conservatives, or is it dissatisfaction with the leadership? Now, if it's the latter, then there is danger, because Theresa May stepping down for a general election, as she promised, would see a new Conservative leader who would, of course, promise the earth and potentially fool the electorate again. So, frankly, the polls don't predict the future any more than throwing entrails into a bowl, and it's only moderately more interesting. So those are my views there. Let me know what yours are below. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification as well, please. And until next time, I'll see you later.